Is this cuddling? Is what we're doing cuddling?
I think this satisfies standard cuddling criteria. Yes.
I thought so.
You have a really bony pelvis, you know. See how it protrudes?
I do have a bony pelvis. My wife used to comment on my pelvis, sometimes.
I have a pretty bony pelvis, too, don't you think? Feel.
It is bony. I think women are supposed to have bony pelvises.
I think it's also in my case like a family thing. Both my brothers have bony pelvises. My younger brother has a really mammoth pelvis.
MMM.
A story, please.
You want a story?
Please.
Did get a rather interesting one today.
Go for it.
Depressing, though.
I want to hear it.
Concerned a man who suffered from second-order vanity.
Second-order vanity?
Yes.
What's that?
You don't know what second-order vanity is?
No.
How interesting.
So what was it?
Well, a second-order vain person is first of all a vain person. He's vain about his intelligence, and wants people to think he's smart. Or his appearance, and wants people to think he's attractive. Or, say, his sense of humor, and wants people to think he's amusing and witty. Or his talent, and wants people to think he's talented. Etc. You know what a vain person is.
Right.
A vain person is concerned that people not perceive him as stupid, or dull, or ugly, etc. etc.
Gotcha.
Now a second-order vain person is a vain person who's also vain about appearing to have an utter lack of vanity. Who's enormously afraid that other people will perceive him as vain. A second-order vain person will sit up late learning jokes in order to appear funny and charming, but will deny that he sits up late learning jokes. Or he'll perhaps even try to give the impression that he doesn't regard himself as funny at all. A second-order vain person will be washing his hands in a public restroom, and will be unable to resist the temptation to admire himself in the mirror, to scrutinize himself, but he'll pretend he's fixing a contact lens or getting something out of his eye while he does so that people won't perceive him as the sort of person who admires himself in mirrors, but rather as the sort of person who uses mirrors only to attend to reasonable, unvain business.
Oh.
This story that came today concerned a man who was second-order vain about his appearance. Vain as hell about his appearance, obsessed with his body, but also obsessed with the desire that no one know of his obsession. He goes to simply enormous lengths to hide his vanity from his girlfriend. Did I mention he lives with a girl, an apparently ravingly beautiful and also very nice girl?
No.
Well, he does, who loves him like mad, and he loves her. And they're getting along fine, although the man is of course under quite a bit of strain, obsessed and also obsessed with hiding his obsession.
Gee.
Indeed. And one day in the bathtub the man notices something strange on his leg, a kind of erased gray spot, and he goes to a doctor and is diagnosed as being in the first stages of a certain non-fatal, but quite disfiguring disease, that will eventually leave this apparently very handsome man not a little disfigured. Unless, that is, he consents to undergo a tremendously complicated and expensive treatment procedure, for which he has to fly all the way to Switzerland, and spend just about his whole life savings, which savings are in a joint bank account and require his lovely girlfriend's co-signature to withdraw.
Wow.
Still, though, if he's all that vain and anxious not to be disfigured, well, but you forget he's also extremely anxious not to be perceived as the sort of man who's anxious not to be disfigured. The thought of his girlfriend knowing that he is the sort of man who would spend his life savings and fly all the way to Switzerland just to keep from being disfigured horrifies him.
What is this disease? Is this supposed to be leprosy?
Something like leprosy, was my impression. Maybe not as bad. I think leprosy can kill you. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that the idea of his girlfriend finding out he is vain so horrifies the man that he delays making the decision to fly to Switzerland for the treatment, and in the meantime the spot is growing, and the skin on his leg is getting grayer, and flaking off in sheets, and the bones are swelling and getting gnarled, which condition he tries to hide by buying a novelty cast and putting it on his leg and telling his girlfriend his leg is mysteriously broken, but the condition is meanwhile spreading to his other leg, and up his stomach and back, and also by implication I think we're to assume his genitals. And so he takes to his bed and keeps himself covered with blankets and tells his girlfriend he's mysteriously sick, and he also by the way starts making an effort to be really cold and aloof to the girlfriend, to keep her at a distance, even though he really loves her to distraction. And he only gets out of bed when she's off at work, she sells women's clothes, and only when she's gone will he get out of bed and stand in front of the full-length mirror in their bathroom, for hours, gazing at himself in horror, and gently sponging the gray flakes off his increasingly twisted body. Yes, and days go by and the disease continues to progress. spreading to the man's upper body and arms and hands, which he tries to hide by claiming he's mysteriously horribly cold, and wearing heavy sweaters and ski mittens. And he's also being increasingly cruel and nasty and bitter toward his lovely roommate, and won't let her come near him, and gives her to understand that she's done something terrible, and made him angry, but won't tell her what it is. And the girlfriend begins to sit up at night in the bathroom crying, and the man can hear her, and his heart is breaking because he loves her so, but he's got this obsession about not being ugly, and of course now if he tells her the truth and shows her everything, not only will she see that he's all of a sudden ugly, but it will also become clear to her that he has the original obsession about not being ugly. See for instance the cast, sweaters and mittens, and of course he's doubly obsessed about not revealing that original obsession. So he gets meaner and meaner to this sweet beautiful girl who loves him, and eventually, even though she's a wonderful girl and deeply in love with him, she's also only human and eventually becomes pissed off, little by little, simply in self-defense, and starts being cold and distant back, and relations between the two get strained, which is breaking the man's heart, deep down. And meanwhile of course the disease is still spreading, it's on his neck, and almost to the height of his highest turtleneck sweater, and also one or two gray flaky gnarls are appearing on the man's nose, previews of coming attractions, the man sees. And so one morning, on about the last day the man figures he can keep it all hidden from the girlfriend, and also the morning after a really major and disastrous fight that clearly almost broke the girl's heart, the girl is sitting in the bathroom, crying, and the man quietly gets out of bed and bundles up and goes and takes a cab to see his doctor. Well, and the doctor's quite upset, understandably, at the man's not having called him in so long. What was he to think? And the doctor's also of course more than a little concerned about the spread of the disease, and he looks the man over and clucks his tongue and says that this is just about the latest the expensive Switzerland treatment can start and still be effective, and that if they delay any longer the disease will swallow the man completely and become irreversible and he'll be alive but gray and flaky and gnarled all over for all time. The doctor looks at the man and says he's going to go out of the office and let him think it over. The doctor clearly thinks the guy's out of his mind for not being in Switzerland already. And so the man sits in the office, alone, all bundled up, with his mittens on, and has a real crisis, and his heart is breaking, and he's incredibly horrified, because of the obsession, but finally he has a breakthrough, which is not too subtly symbolized by a ray of sunlight breaking through the heavy clouds that are in the sky that day and coming through the window of the doctor's office and hitting the man. But in any way he sees in this breakthrough that the most important thing is really his wonderful, lovely girlfriend and their love, and that's what really matters, and so he decides to call her and tell her everything and get her to come down and co-sign the withdrawal slip for his life savings, so he can hop a flight to Switzerland that very day, and to hell with the horror of telling her, even though it will be unbelievably horrifying.
Wow.
And the way the story ends is with the man sitting at the doctor's desk, with the phone in his mitten, listening to the phone ring in the apartment, and it's ringing quite a few times, though not yet a ridiculous number of times, but enough so it's just becoming by implication unclear whether the girlfriend is even still there or not, whether she's taken off, maybe for good. And that's how it ends, with the man there and the phone ringing in his mitten and the patch of sun on him through the doctor's window.
Good lord. Are you going to use it?
No. Too long. It's a long story, over 40 pages. Also poorly typed. Stop that. Lenore, stop it. Not even remotely funny.
Except how did you know so much about it?
Know about what?
Second-order vanity. You were like really surprised I didn't know about second-order vanity.
What shall I say? Shall I simply say I'm a man of the world?
Ginger ale?
Not right now, thank you though. A nurse's aide threw the contents of her patient's water glass out a window, the mass of water hitting the ground dislodging a pebble, which rolled across the angled pavement and fell with a click on a stone culvert in the ditch below, startling a squirrel having had some sort of nut right there on the concrete pipe, causing the squirrel to run up the nearest tree, in doing which it disturbed a slender brittle branch and surprised a few nervous morning birds, one of which, preparatory to flight, released a black and white glob of droppings, which glob fell neatly on the windshield of the tiny car of one Lenore Beatsman, just as she pulled into a parking space.
I got out of the car while the birds flew away, making sounds. Flower beds of pretend marble, the plastic sagging and powdered lips in places from the heat of the last month, flanked the smooth concrete ramp that ran up from the edge of the parking lot to the home's front doors, the late summer flowers dry and grizzled in the deep beds of dry dirt and soft plastic, a few brown vines running weakly up the supports of the handrails that went along the ramp above the flower beds, the paint of the handrails bright yellow and looking soft and sticky even this early in the day. Dew glittered low in the crunchy August grass, like when the sun moved in the lawn as Lenore went up the ramp. Outside the doors an old black woman stood motionless with her walker, her mouth open to the sun. Above the doors, along a narrow chimpanum of sun-punched plastic again pretending to be igneous marble, ran the Letters Shaker Heights nursing home. On either side of the doors, impressed into stone walls that reached curving away out of sight to become the building's face, or entombed the likenesses of tufts. Inside the doors, in the glass tank between outer and inner entries, languished 3 people in wheelchairs, blanket lapped even in a greenhouse heated amid moaming glass, one with a neck drooping so badly to the side that her ear rested on her shoulder. "Hi," Lenore Beatsman said as she hurried through an inner glass door frosted in the sunlight with old fingerprints. Lenore knew the prints were from the wheelchair patients, for whom the metal bar with the push sign on it was too high and too hard. Lenore had been here before. The Shaker Heights home had just one story to it. This level was broken into many sections and covered a lot of territory. I came out of the hot tank and down the somewhat cooler hall toward this particular section's receiving desk, with the tropical overhead fan rotating slowly over it. Inside the donut reception desk was a nurse I hadn't seen before, a dark blue sweater caped over her shoulders and held with a metal clasp on which was embossed a profile of Lawrence Welk. People in wheelchairs were everywhere, lining all the walls. The noise was loud and incomprehensible, rising and falling, notched by notes of laughter at nothing and cries of rage over who knew what. The nurse looked up as Lenore got close. "Hi, I'm Lenore Beadsman," Lenore said, a little out of breath. The nurse stared at her for a second.
"Well, that's not terribly amusing, is it?"
"Pardon me?" Lenore asked. The nurse gave her the fisheye. "Oh, I think the thing is we've never met. Madge is usually here, where you are. I'm Lenore Beadsman, but I guess I'm here to see Lenore Beadsman, too. She's my great-grandmother, and
Well, you just...
The nurse looked at something on the big desk.
You just let me ring Mr. Bloemka? Hold on.
I guess I'd rather just go ahead and see Lenore. Is she okay? The nurse looked at her.
Your hair is wet.
I know.
And uncombed.
Yes, thank you, I know. See, I was just in the shower when my landlady called up the stairs that I had a phone call from Mr. Blomker.
How did your landlady know?
Pardon?
That you had a phone call from Mr. Bloemka?
Well, it's the neighbor's phone that I use, but she didn't.
You don't have a phone?
What is this? No, I don't have a phone. Listen, I'm very sorry to keep asking, but is my grandma alright or not? I mean, Mr. Blomker said to come right over. Should I call my family? Where's Lenore? The nurse was staring at a point over Lenore's left shoulder. Her face had resolved into some kind of hard material.
I'm afraid I'm in no position to say anything about.
Looking down.
Lenore Beadsman, Area F, but now, if you'll just be so kind as to wait a moment, we can.
Where's the morning nurse who's supposed to be here? Where's Madge? Where's Mr. Blomker? Mr. Blomker peered in the dim recesses of the corridor, beyond the reach of light from the reception area.
Miss Beadsman.
Mr. Blomker.
Shush,
said the nurse. Lenore's shout had produced a groundswell of sighs and moans and objectless shouts from the wheelchair forms lining the perimeter of the circular reception station. A television went on in the lounge off the hall, and Lenore caught a glimpse of a brightly colored game show as she hurried down toward Mr. Blomker. Mr. Blomker.
Hello, Miss Beadsman. Thank you so much for coming so quickly and so early. Were you to be at work soon?
Is my great-grandmother all right? Why did you call?
Why don't we just nip over to my office?
Well, but I don't understand why I can't just... Lenore stopped. Oh my lord. She didn't.
Oh dear me, no. Please come with me. Be careful. Watch the... Good morning, Mrs. Feltner.
A woman carrying past in a wheelchair. Who's that nurse at the desk?
Well, now, just imagine how you'd feel if your great-grandmother it could really probably be argued in more than one sense of the word, which is to say the supplier of your name, the person under whose aegis you'd first experienced chocolate, books, swing sets, and anomalies, pencil games, contract bridge, the desert, the person in whose presence you'd first bled into your underwear. At 16, now, late 16, grotesquely late as we seem to remember, in the East Wing, during the closing theme of My Three Sons, when the animated loafers were tapping, with you and Lenore watching, the slipping, sick relief, laughter and scolding at once, Grandma used her left arm and there was her old hand in Lenore's new oldness. The person to whose personal general altogether, and was for all you knew lying flat as a wet saltine on some highway with a tire track in her forehead and her walker now a sort of large trivet, and you'll have an idea of how Lenore Beadsman felt when she was informed that her great-grandmother, with whom all the above clauses did take place, was missing from the Shaker Heights nursing home, in Shaker Heights, right near Cleveland, Ohio, near which Lenore lived, in East Corinth. combination embryonic journal and draft space for field binder collection. Richard Vigorous, 62 Bombardini Building, E-Review Plaza, Cleveland, Ohio. Reasonable reward for proper and discreet return. Lenore, come to work, where I am. Remove yourself from the shower immediately and come to work now. I'll not come down for my paper until you are here. Mandible is getting suspicious when I call.
You're outside of a door, which like all the doors here looked like solid wood, but was really hollow and light and rattled in its latch. When the office window was open and the wind blew, said David Blomker, administrator of facility. The office, like the rest of the home, smelled faintly of urine. I'm sorry, but I don't think I understand what you're saying, Lenore said. Mr. Blomker had sad wet brown eyes and blinked behind round glasses as he pulled and scratched at his beard in the heat.
What I'm saying, Miss Beedsman, is that with all possible apologies and every assurance that we are doing everything within our power to resolve the situation, I must report to you that Area F's Lenore Beedsman is at this point in time missing.
I don't think I understand what missing means.
I am afraid that it means that we are unable to determine her present whereabouts.
You don't know where she is.
That is unfortunately right.
What? You mean you don't know where she is in the home?
Oh my no, if she were on the grounds, there would be no situation of any significance. No, we have, those of us on hand at the moment have covered the entire facility.
So, what? She's somewhere off the grounds?
That would seem to be so, to our extreme distress.
Mr. Blomker's fingers, with their long nails, sank into his beard. Well, how may I ask did that happen?
This is not entirely clear to anyone.
Looking off, out the window, at the sun through the trees on a car right by the window. It was Lenore's car, with a spot on the windshield. Well, was she here last night?
We are at this time unable to determine that.
There must have been a nurse who looked in on her last night. What does she say? Blomker looked at her sadly.
I'm afraid we are at present unable to contact the relevant nurse.
And why is that?
I am afraid we don't know where she is.
Either?
A bad smile.
Either.
Gee. Mr. Blomker's telephone buzzed. Lenore eyed it as he went to answer it. Not eccentrics, no crossbar. Something primitive, single line unretrievable transfers, no hunters. Yes, Mr. Blomker said.
Yes. Please.
He hung up gently and went backward, blinking moistly at Lenore. Lenore had a thought. All right, but what about Mrs. Yingst, in the next room? She and Lenore like this. Mrs. Yingst is sure to know when she was last around. Have you talked to Mrs. Yingst? Mr. Blomker looked at his thumb. Mrs. Yingst is around, isn't she?
Not at this time, unfortunately, no.
Meaning she's missing too.
I am afraid I must say yes.
Mr. Blomker's eyes shone with regret. Lenore thought she saw a bit of egg in his beard. Well, listen, what exactly is going on here, then? Is everybody gone and you have no idea where they are? I think I just don't understand the situation, yet, completely.
Oh, Miss Beadsman, nor in truth do I, to my profound grief, movement in one side of his face.
Movement in one side of his face.
What I have been able to determine is that at some point in the last, shall we say, 16 hours some number of residents and staff here at the facility have become unavailable to access.
Meaning missing.
Yes.
How many of them are patients?
20 residents are at this time unavailable.
Meaning 20 patients.
We prefer to call them residents, Miss Beadsman, since as you know we try to offer an environment in which—
Fine, well, but don't a lot of the missing residents need IVs to get fed and stuff? And little things like insulin, and antibiotics, and heart medicine, and help dressing and taking showers? Lenore can hardly even move her left arm this summer, and plus it's pretty cold for her, outside, for very long, so I just don't see how they could.
Miss Beadsman, please rest assured that you and I are in more than complete agreement on this. That I am as confused and distraught as are you. As disoriented.
Mr. Blomker's cheeks yielded to the force of his beard abuse, began to move around, so it looked like he was making faces at Lenore.
I find myself facing a situation I, believe me, never dreamt of possibly encountering, monstrous and disorienting.
He licked his lips.
As well, just allow me to say, one for which my training as facility administrator prepared me not at all, not at all.
Lenore looked at her shoe. Mr. Blomker's phone buzzing flashed again. He reached and listened.
Please.
He said into the phone.
Thank you.
He hung up and then for some reason came around the desk, as if to take Lenore's hand, to comfort. Lenore stared at him, and he stopped. So have you called my father over at Stone Safico? She asked. Should I call him? Clarice is just over in the city, my sister. Is she in on this news? Mr. Blomker shook his head, his hand trailing.
We've contacted no one else at this time. Since you were Lenore's only really regular visitor from among her family, I thought of you first.
What about the other patients' families? If there's like 20 gone, this place should be a madhouse.
There are very few visitors here as a rule, you would be surprised. In any event, we have contacted no one else as yet.
And why haven't you? Mr. Blomker looked at the ceiling for a second. There was a really unattractive brown stain soaked into the soft white tile. Light from the sun was coming through the east windows and falling across the room, a good bit of it on Blomker, making one of his eyes glow gold. He leveled it at Lenore.
The fact is that I have been instructed not to.
Instructed? By whom?
By the owners of the facility.
Lenore looked up at him sharply. Last I knew, the owner of the facility was Stone Sifico.
Correct.
Meaning basically my father.
Yes.
But I thought you said my father didn't know anything about this.
No, I said I had not contacted anyone else as of yet, is what I said. As a matter of fact, it was I who was contacted earlier this morning at home and informed of the state of affairs by
Sifting through papers on his desk.
a Mr. Rummage, who apparently serves Stone Sifico in some legal capacity. How he knew of the situation is utterly beyond me.
Carl Rummage. He's with a law firm my father uses for personal business.
Yes,
He twisted some beard around his finger.
well apparently it is not wished to have the situation of cognizance to those other than the owners at this moment by the owners.
You want to run that by me again?
They don't want anyone to know just yet.
Ah. So then why did you call me? I mean, thank you very much for doing so, obviously, but another sad smile.
Your thanks are without warrant, I'm afraid. I was instructed to do what I did.
Oh,
The obvious inference to draw here is that the fact that you are after all a beadsman and enjoy some connection to the ownership of the facility through Stone Sifico.
that's just not true.
Oh really? In any event, it's clear that you can be relied on for a measure of discretion beyond that of the average relative on the street.
I see. Blomker took a deep breath and rubbed a gullet eye with her white finger. In the air around him a whirlpool of dust motes was created. It whirled.
There is in addition the fact that the resident whose temporary unavailability is relevant to you, that is to say Lenore, enjoyed a status here with the facility administration, the staff, and, through the force of her personality and her evident gifts, especially with the other residents, that leads one to believe that, were the mice location a result of anything other than outright coercion on the part of some outside person or persons, which seems unlikely, it would not be improper to posit the location and retrieval of Lenore's near assurance of retrieving the other misplaced parties.
I didn't understand any of that.
Your great-grandmother was more or less the ringleader around here.
Oh,
Surely you knew that.
not really, no.
But you were here,
Looking at a sheet on his desk.
often several times a week, sometimes for long periods of time.
We talked about other stuff. We sure never talked about any rings led. And usually there wasn't anybody else around, what with the heat of the room. Lenore looked at her sneaker. And also my just plain grandmother's a resident here, too, in area jail Lenore's daughter-in-law.
Concamadin.
Yes. She? Oh, she is here, isn't she?
Oh yes,
Said Blomker. He looked at the sheet, then at Lenore.
as far as I am aware. Perhaps you'll excuse me for a moment.
He went to his phone. Lenore watched him dial in house. A 3-digit really means no crossbar. Blomker was asking someone something in an administrative undertone Lenore couldn't hear. Thank you, she heard him say. Yes. He smiled.
We'll simply check to be sure.
Lenore had a thought. Maybe it would be good if I had a look at Lenore's room, took a look around, maybe see if I could notice something.
That's just what I was going to suggest.
Is your beard okay?
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, nervous habit. I'm afraid, the state of affairs at the...
Mr. Blomker pulled both hands out of his beard. So shall we go? Certainly. Or should I call my father from here?
I cannot get an outside line on this phone. I'm sorry.
I didn't think so.
After you.
Thank you. The home was broken into 10 sections, areas they were called, each roughly pentagonal in shape, housing who knows how many patients. The 10 areas arranged in a circle, each area accessible by 2 and only 2 others, or via the center of the circle, a courtyard filled with chalky white gravel and heavy dark plants and a pool of concentric circles of colored water distributed and separated and kept unadulterated by a system of plastic sheeting and tubing, the tubing leading in toward the pool in the center from a perimeter of 10 smooth, heavy wooden sculptures of jungle animals and tafts and stone cipher beadsmen the first, second, and third, with a translucent plastic roof high overhead that let in light for the plants, but kept rain or falling dew from diluting the colors of the pool. The interior planes of each of the 10 sections walled in glass and accessing into the courtyard, the yard itself off limits to residents, because the gravel was treacherous to walk it, swallowed canes and the legs of walkers, mired wheelchairs, and made people fall over, people with hips like spun glass Lenore had once told Lenore. Down the corridor, through a door, around the perimeter of one area, past a gauntlet of reaching wheelchair figures, out a glass panel, through the steamy crunch of the courtyard gravel, through another panel, and halfway around the perimeter of Area F, Mr. Blomker led Lenore to her great-grandmother's room, put his key in the lock of another light, pretend wood door. The room was round, looked with big windows into the east parking lots with a view at the corner of which glittered, spangled with light through the trees in the wind, Lenore's little red car again. The room was unbelievably hot. "You didn't turn the heat down?" Lenore said. Mr. Blomker stayed in the doorway.
The owners had installed an automatic duct complex to this room that is as difficult to dismantle as it is resistant to malfunction. We are also of course expecting that Lenore will be back with us very soon.
Steam hung in the air of the room, you could feel its breath on your lips. The windows sweated broadly, the movement of the sun through the trees made a dark green flutter on the white walls. Lenore Beadsman, who was 92, suffered no real physical disability save a certain lack of capacity on her left side, and the complete absence of any kind of body thermometer. She now depended for her body's temperature on the temperature of the air around her. She had in effect become sort of cold-blooded. This had come to the attention of her family in 1986, after the death of her husband, Stone Cipher Beadsman, when she began to take on a noticeable blue hue. The temperature in Lenore's room here at the home was 98.6 degrees. This simultaneously kept Grandma alive and comfortable and kept her visitors down to me at a brief bare minimum with other patients and staff, and very occasionally Lenore's sister, Clarice. The room contained a bed that was made, a desk and bedside table sheen with humidity, a water glass on the bedside table whose contents had almost evaporated, a bureau on which were ranged some jars of Stone Esophago baby food, some vaguely malevolent black cords snaking out from the wall, the remnants of a cable hookup to a television Grandma had caused to be removed, a chair, a closet door, a clotted shaker of salt, and on a black metal TV tray a little clay horse I had gotten Grandma in Spain a long time ago. The walls were bare. "Okay," Lenore said, looking around. She pretty obviously took her walker. She opened the closet door. She couldn't have taken very many clothes. "Here's her suitcase." Or taken much underwear. Looking in the bureau drawers, Lenore picked up one of the jars of Stone Esophago baby food, one with a red ink drawing of a laughing baby on the label. "Strained beef flavor. She eats the stuff?" she asked, looking over at Mr. Blomker, who stood with a sweat shiny face in the doorway, massaging his chin.
Not to my knowledge.
"I'd bet money she doesn't." Lenore went to the desk. There were 3 light, empty drawers. 1 locked drawer. "Did you open this drawer, here?"
We were unable to locate the key.
"Ah!" Lenore went to the TV table, took the little clay horse and popped its head off, and out fell a key and fluttered a tiny picture of Lenore, out of a locket. The picture was old and dull. The key made a sound on the metal table. Mr. Blomker wiped at his forehead with the sleeve of his sport coat. Lenore opened the drawer. In it were Grandma's notebooks, yellow and crispy, old, and her copy of the investigations, and a small piece of fuzzy white paper, which actually turned out to be a torn-off label from another jar of Stone Esophago food. Cream peach. On the white back of the label something was doodled. There was nothing else in the drawer. Which is to say there was no green book in the drawer. "This is just weird," Lenore was saying. She looked at Mr. Blomker. She didn't take the investigations, which is like a prized possession, because it's autograph, or her notebooks either. Except I guess she did take a book. She kept a book in here. Have you ever maybe seen a green book, pretty heavy, bound with a sort of greenish leather, with like a little decorative lock and clasp? Mr. Blomker nodded at her. There was a drop of sweat hanging from his nose.
I do think I recall seeing Lenore with such a book. I had rather assumed it was her diary, or a record of her days at Cambridge, which I knew were immensely important to her.
Lenore shook her head. "No, that's more or less what these are," indicating the yellowed notebooks in the open drawer. "No, I don't know what this thing was, but she had done the investigations with her all the time. Remember how when she'd go out of her room her nightgown would be all sagging down in front? She couldn't carry the books and use her walker, so she had this big pocket on the front of her nightgown, and she'd put them in there, and it would sag. Lenore felt herself beginning to get upset, remembering. Had she gone out of the room much the last few days? There were wet sounds as Mr. Blomker worked at his face.
I know for a fact that it's a matter of established routine. Lenore was out in the Area F lounge for some period every afternoon. Holding forth. When were you last here, may I ask?
I think a week ago today. Mr. Blomker's eyebrows went up. Drops stopped and started on his forehead. The thing is that my brother was getting set to go back to college. I've been helping him buy stuff and arrange things and work out some things with my father when I haven't been working. There was a lot of stuff to arrange.
His college must begin terribly early. It's not yet even September.
No, the place he goes, which is this place called Dimers College in Massachusetts. It doesn't start for a couple weeks yet, but he wanted to go visit our mother before the year started and everything.
Visit your mother?
She's sort of resting in Wisconsin.
Ah?
Listen, should I call her and tell her what's going on? She's Lenore's relative too. I really think we better call the police. Mr. Blomker's glasses had slipped almost all the way down his nose. He pushed them up, and they immediately slid down again.
What I can do at this point is pass along to you the information and requests relayed to me very early by Mr. Rummage.
He tugged at his cuffs.
The police are not going to be contacted at this point in time. The owners are of the opinion, for reasons which I must in all honesty confess remain at this moment hazy to me, that this is an internal nursing care facility matter which can be brought to some quick resolution without resort to outside aid. If of course it be so, the advantages accruing in terms of minimal embarrassment and impediment to the facility are obvious. You are requested to inform no one of any details of the situation until you have spoken to your father. You are requested to contact your father at your very earliest opportunity.
Dad is really hard to contact, usually.
Nevertheless.
Lenore looked back at the open desk drawer. This is making very little sense to me. And what about the relatives of the staff who are unavailable right now? Won't their families find their unavailability a little out of the ordinary? They're going to be apt to want to call the police, don't you think? I don't blame them. I'd like to call the police, too. Mr. Blomker's glasses suddenly fell off his nose and he caught them, barely, and wiped the bridge of his nose with his fingers.
It is at this point unclear whether the families of the unavailable staff are themselves unavailable because of normal extra home commitments, or whether they too have become unavailable in a manner similar to that of the staff, but the in a way fortuitous, though of course also quite disquieting fact remains.
What was all that? Lenore said from back at Grandma's drawer.
The families aren't around, either.
Gosh.
What are you doing?
Blomker asked. Lenore was looking at the ink drawing on the back of the stone Cifico label that lay on top of the notebooks in the desk drawer. It featured a person, apparently in a smock. In one hand was a razor, and the other a can of shaving cream. Lenore could even see the word Nazima on the can. The person's head was an explosion of squiggles of ink. Looking at this thing, she said. Mr. Blomker moved closer. He smelled like a wet diaper.
What is it?
He asked, looking over Lenore's shoulder. If it's what I think it is, it's a sort of joke. Oh, what do you call it? An antinomy.
An antinomy?
Lenore nodded. Grandma really likes antinomies. I think this guy here, looking down at the drawing on the back of the label, is the barber who shaves all and only those who do not shave themselves. Mr. Blomker looked at her.
A barber?
The big killer question, Lenore said to the sheet of paper, is supposed to be whether the barber shaves himself. I think that's why his head's exploded, here.
Beg pardon.
If he does, he doesn't, and if he doesn't, he does. Mr. Blomker stared down at the drawing, smoothed his beard. Look, can we leave? Lenore asked. It's really hot. I want to leave.
By all means.
Lenore put the stone Cifico label in her purse and shut the drawer. I'll put the key here on the desk, but I don't think anybody other than the police ought to go looking through Grandma's stuff, assuming the police get called, which I really think they ought to.
I quite agree. You are taking the
antinomy.
Yes.
Is that okay?
The person on the telephone said nothing indicating otherwise.
Thanks. There was a knock at the door. A staff member handed a note to Mr. Blomker. Blomker read the note. The staff member looked at Lenore's dress and shoes for a moment and left.
Well, of course, as I fully expected, Concomitant Beadsman is still with us, over in J. Would you perhaps care to see her before you?
No thanks, really. Lenore cut him off. I really have to get to work. What time is it, by the way? God, I'm going to be really late. I'm going to get killed. I hope Candy isn't mad about covering. Look, is there a phone where I can dial out the call and say I'll be late? I really need to call.
There are dial-out phones at every reception station. I'll show you.
I remember, come to think of it.
Of course.
Look, I'm going to be in touch. Soon, obviously. I'm going to get hold of my father from work, and I'll tell him he should call you.
That would be enormously helpful, thank you.
Mr. Blomker sure had soaked the outline of a thin V through his sport coat. And of course please call me if anything happens, if you find anything out. Either at work or over at the Chisholm's house.
Rest assured that I will. You are still employed at Frequent and Vigorous.
Yes. Have you got the number?
Somewhere, I'm sure.
Really, let me give it to you to be sure. We get an incredible amount of wrong numbers. Lenore wrote the number on a card from her purse and handed it to Mr. Blomker. Mr. Blomker looked at the front of the card.
Rick Vigorous, editor, reader, administrator, all-around literary presence, Frequent and Vigorous Publishing, Incorporated.
Never mind, just there's the number. Can we please go to the dial-out phone? I'm hideously late, and being here longer isn't going to help get Lenore back, I can see.
Of course. Let me get the door.
Thank you.
Not at all.
I have a truly horrible dream, which invariably occurs on the nights I am Lenoreless in my bed. I am attempting to stimulate the clitoris of Queen Victoria with the back of a tortoiseshell hairbrush. Her voluminous skirts swirl around her waist and my head. Her enormous cottage cheese thighs rest heavy on my shoulders, spill out in front of my sweating face. The clanking of pounds of jewelry is heard as she shifts to offer herself at best advantage. There are odors. The Queen's impatient breathing is thunder above me as I kneel at the throne. Time passes. Finally her voice is heard, overhead, metallic with disgust and frustration. We are not aroused. I am punched in the arm by a guard and flung into a pit at the bottom of which boil the figures of countless mice. I awake with a mouthful of fur, begging for more time. A ribbed brush. One big problem with owning one of those new Mattel Ultra Compact cars, which was what Lenore owned, was that the plastic car had a plastic choke which had to be engaged while the car warmed up for not fewer than 5 minutes, which was particularly irritating in the summer, because Lenore had to sit in the small oven that was the car for these 5 minutes, while the engine raced like mad and made a lot of unpleasant noise, before she could get going and have some cooler air blow on her. While she made the choke wait in the home's parking lot, Lenore watched an ant nibble at something in the wad of bird droppings that lay near the top of her windshield.
The ant was torn off the windshield by the wind when Lenore hit the inner belt of a 271 and started going seriously fast. The offices of the publishing firm of Frequent and Vigorous were in that part of downtown Cleveland called View Plaza, right near Lake Erie. Lenore took the inner belt south and west from Shaker Heights, preparatory to her being flung by a 271 northward into the city itself, which meant that she was for a while with her car tracing the outline of the city of East Corinth, Ohio, which was where she had her apartment, and which determined the luxuriant and not unpopular shape of the inner belt section of a 271.
East Corinth had been founded and built in the 1960s by Stonecipher Beadsman II, son of Lenore Beadsman. Lenore Beadsman's grandfather, who was unfortunately killed at age 65 in 1975 in a vet accident during a brief and disastrous attempt on the part of Stonecipher Baby Food Products to develop and market something that would compete with Jell-O. Stonecipher Beadsman II had been a man of many talents and even more interests.
He had been a really fanatical moviegoer, as well as an amateur urban planner, and he had been particularly rabid in his attachment to a film star named Jane Mansfield. East Corinth lay in the shape of a profile of Jane Mansfield, leading down from Shaker Heights in a nimbus of winding road networks, through delicate features of homes and small businesses, a button nose of a park, and a full half-smiling section of rotary, through a sinuous swan-like curve of the highway extension and track housing, before jutting precipitously westward in a huge, swollen development of factories and industrial parks, mammoth and bustling, the belt curving back no less moderately a couple miles south into a trim lower border of homes and stores and apartment buildings and some boarding houses, including that in which Lenore Beadsman herself lived and from which she had driven up over Jane Mansfield to the Shaker Heights home this morning. Families and firms owning property along the critical western boundary of the suburb were required by zoning code to paint their facilities in the most realistic colors possible, a condition to which property owners in the far westward section near Garfield Heights, where the industrial swelling was most pronounced, particularly objected, and as one can imagine the whole East Corinth area was immensely popular with airline pilots, who all tended to demand landing patterns into Cleveland Hopkins Airport over East Corinth, and who had made a constant racket, flying low and blinking their lights on and off and waggling their wings. The people of East Corinth, many of them unaware of the shape their town really lay in, a knowledge not exactly public, got and drove and walked over the form of Jane Mansfield, shaking their fists at the bellies of planes. Lenore had lived in East Corinth only 2 years, ever since she had gotten out of college and decided she did not want to live at home or enter Stone Esopheco, all at once. To the south, 271 gave way to 77, and 77 led jump to Bedford, Talmadge, Akron, and Canton before stretching into the great Ohio desert, with its miles of ash-fine black sand, and cacti and scorpions, and crowds of fishermen, and concession stands at the rim. There are 2 reliable ways to identify the Bombardini building, which was where the firm of Frequent and Vigors made its home. A look from the south at Erie View Tower, high and rectangular not far from the terminal section of Cleveland's downtown, reveals that the sun, always at either right or left tangent to the placement of the tower, casts a huge, dark shadow of the building over the surrounding area, a deep, severely angled shadow that joins the bottom of the tower in Black Union, but then bends precipitously off to the side, as if the Erie View Plaza section of Cleveland were a still pool of water, into which the tower had been dipped, the shadow its refracted submergence. In the morning, when the shadow casts from east to west, the Bombardini building stands sliced by light, white and black, on the tower's northern side. As the day swells and the shadow compacts and moves ponderously in and east, and as clouds begin to complicate the shapes of darknesses, the Bombardini building is slowly eaten by black, the steady suck of the dark broken only by epileptic flashes of light caused by clouds with pollutant bases bending rays of sun as the Bombardini building flirts ever more seriously with the border of the shadow. By mid-afternoon the Bombardini building is in complete darkness, the windows glow yellow, cars go by with headlights. The Bombardini building, then, is easy to find, occurring nowhere other than on the perimeter of the sweeping side of the Midwest's very most spectacular shadow. The other aforementioned identifying feature was the white skeleton of General Moses Cleveland, which found itself in shallow repose in the cement of the sidewalk in front of the Bombardini building, its outline clearly visible, of no little interest to passing pedestrians and the occasional foraging dog. The latter's advance is discouraged by a thin bit of electrified grillwork, the General's nest thus largely untroubled save by the pole of a sign which jutted disrespectfully out of Cleveland's left eye socket, the sign itself referring to a hugely outlined parking space in front of the building and reading, Frequent and Vigors Publishing shared the Bombardini building with the administrative facilities of the Bombardini Company, a firm involved in some vague genetic engineering enterprises about which Lenore in all honesty cared to know as little as possible. The Bombardini Company occupied most of the lower 3 floors, and a single vertical line of offices up the 6th-story height of the Bombardini building's east side. Frequent and Vigors took a vertical line of narrow space on the western side of the building for 3 floors, then swelled out to take almost all the top 3. The Frequent and Vigors telephone switchboard, where Lenore worked, was in the western corner of the cavernous Bombardini building lobby, across the huge back wall of which, cast through the giant windows in the front wall of the lobby, the Erie View shadow steadily and even measurably moved, eating the wall. Time could with reasonable accuracy be measured by the position of the shadow against the back wall, except when the black and white window light flickered like a silent movie during the fickle shadow period of midday.
Which it now was. Lenore was hideously late. She hadn't been able to get through to Candy Mandible on the phone, either. The Shaker Heights home's phones were apparently on the fritz. F&V's number had put Lenore in touch with Cleveland Towing.
Frequent and vigorous.
Candy Mandible was saying into the switchboard console phone.
Frequent and vigorous. No, this is not Enrique's House of Cheese. Shall I give you that number, even though it might not work? You're welcome.
Candy, God, I'm so sorry. It was unavoidable. I couldn't get through. Lenore came back behind the counter and into the switchboard cubicle. The window high overhead flashed a cathedral spear of sun, then was dark.
Lenore, you're like 3 hours late. That's just a little much.
My supervisor wouldn't take it. I'd get fired if I pulled anything like what you guys pull.
Judith Proust shot off between calls beeping at the Bombardini Company switchboard console a few feet away in the tiny cubicle. Lenore put her purse by the security phones. She came close to Candy Mandible. I tried to call you. Mrs. Tissot called me out of the shower at like 9:30 because Schwartz had answered this call for me. I had to go to the nursing home right away.
Something's wrong.
Yes. Lenore saw that Judith Proust's ears were a prick. Can I just talk to you later? Will you be home later on?
I'll be off over Adelaide at 6. I was supposed to be over there at freaking 12, but it's okay.
See Lenore's expression.
Clint said he'd get somebody to cover for me as long as I wanted. Are you all right? Which one is it?
Lenore.
She didn't?
It's unclear.
Unclear?
My supervisor, you gotta have reasons for being late, and submit them in advance, and they have to get signed by Mr. Bombardini.
Judith said amid beeping zingings.
But then we have a real business, we get real calls. Bombardini Company. Bombardini Company. One moment.
She's being particularly pleasant today, said Lenore. Candy made a strangle motion at Judith, then started to get her stuff together. The console sounded. Lenore got it. Frequent and vigorous, she said. She listened and looked up at Candy. Bambi's Den of Discipline? No, this is most definitely not Bambi's Den of Discipline. Candy, do you have the number of a Bambi's Den of Discipline? Candy gave her the number, but said it probably wouldn't make any difference. Lenore recited the number and released.
I can't figure it out. I don't see nothing wrong.
A voice came from under the console counter, under Lenore's chair, by her legs. Lenore looked down. There were big boots protruding from under the counter. They began to jiggle. A figure struggled to emerge. Lenore shot her chair back.
Lenore, there's line trouble that I guess started last night, from said.
Candy said.
This is Peter Abbott. He's with Interactive Cable. They're trying to fix the problem.
Interactive Cable?
Like the phone company, but not the phone company.
Oh, Lenore looked listlessly at Peter Abbott. Hi,
Well, hello.
said Peter, winking furiously at Lenore and pulling up his collar. Lenore looked up at Candy as Peter played with something hanging from his tool belt.
Peter is very friendly, it seems.
Said Candy Mandible.
Well, I can't see nothing wrong in there. I'm stumped.
What's the problem?
It's not good. We I guess more or less don't have a number anymore. Is that right?
She looked at Peter Abbott.
Well, you got line trouble. Yeah, line trouble.
Right, which apparently in this case means we don't have a number anymore, or rather we do, but so does like the whole rest of Cleveland, in that we now all of a sudden share a single number with all these other places. All these places that share our line tunnel. You know all those numbers we were just one off of, and we just get the wrong numbers all the time. Steve's Sub, Cleveland Towing, Big BM Cafe, Fussin, Feathers Pets, Dial-A-Darling. Well now they're like all the same number. You dial their numbers, and the F&V number rings. Plus a whole lot of new ones, a cheese shop, some Goodyear service office, that Bambi's Den of Discipline, which by the way gets a disturbing number of calls. We've all got the same number now. It's nuts. Is that right what I said?
She asked Peter Abbott. She got her stuff and got ready to leave, looking at her watch.
At least now you'll have calls. At least now you'll have something to do for a change.
Said Judith Priest.
Bombardini Company. Bombardini Company.
How come she's not messed up? Lenore gestured at Judith.
Different line tunnels.
Peter Abbott said.
Bombardini Incorporated's lines are actually, it turns out, in this tunnel pretty far away, a few blocks west of Erie View. The calls just get into here via a matrix sharing thread transfer, which is a real complicated plus ancient thing. Your lines are in a tunnel right under this building, under the lobby, out under that guy's skeleton.
Peter Abbott pointed at the floor.
So then why are you up here instead of down with the lines?
Candy Mandible wanted to know.
I'm not a tunnel man. I'm a console man. I don't do tunnels. They sent some guy from tunnels down there early this morning. It's gotta be his problem. I can't find nothing up here with what you girls got. This is a 28, right? I haven't lost my mind?
Right, Centrix 28.
I know it's a Centrix. That's all I do. I'm bored as shit with Centrexes. Excuse my French.
Well, what did the guy from the tunnel say? Lenore asked. Candy was answering a phone.
Dunno, cause I haven't talked to him. I sure can't call him, am I right?
What? We can't dial out on this, either?
I was just making a joke. You can call out, okay, just try again if you get an automatic loop into one of the other in-tunnel points. No, I just have to talk to the tunnel guy in person, back at the office. We have to write up reports.
Peter looked at Lenore.
You married?
Oh, brother.
This one's not married either, right?
Peter Abbott asked Candy, nodding over at Lenore. His hair wasn't blonde so much as just yellow, like a crayon. His face had the color of a kind of dark nut. Not the sort of tan that comes from the sun. Lenore sensed cabinating. The guy looked like a photographic negative, she decided. He sighed.
2 unmarried girls, in distress, working in this tiny little office.
Women.
Candy Mandible corrected.
I'm not married either.
Judith Priest called over. Judith Priest was about 50. So can Bambi and Big Bob and all the others even get any calls, now? Lenore asked. Do their phones ring at all?
Sometimes not.
Peter Abbott said, jingling his belt.
The point is they can't be sure where it'll ring, and neither can you, which is obviously subpar service. Your number's not picking you out of the network like it should, it's as we say picking out a target set and not a target.
Lovely.
At least now you'll have some calls to answer. All you ever get is wrong numbers anyway. You guys are going to go bankrupt. You ever heard of a publishing house in Cleveland?
I like your shoes.
Peter Abbott said to Lenore.
I got some shoes just like that.
Does Rick know about all this? Lenore asked Candy. Candy stopped.
Rick. Lenore, call him right away.
What's the matter?
Who knows what's ever the matter? All I know is first he just had a complete spasm about your not being here. This was at like 10:01. And then now he keeps calling down all the time, to see if you're here yet. He keeps pretending it's different people asking for you, holding his nose, putting a hanky over the phone, trying this totally pitiful English accent, pretending it's outside calls for you, which he should know I can tell it isn't because he knows the way the console light flashes all fast when they're in-house calls. God knows he spends enough time down here. And now he hasn't come down for his paper, even, he's just sitting up there brooding, playing with his hat.
What else does he have to do?
Said Judith Pratt, who was unwrapping Mac's paper from a sandwich and blinking coquettishly at Peter Rabbit, who was in turn trying to stare down over the counter into Lenore's cleavage. God, well I really need to talk to him, too.
Sweetie, I forgot for a second. How just totally horrible. You must be out of your head. Are you sure you're all right?
I think so. Vern will be in at 6. I'll call Rick as soon as I can. I have to call my father, too. And his lawyer.
I sensed something in the wind.
You hush.
Said Candy Mandible. She squeezed Lenore's arm as she passed.
I'm late. I have to go. You come home tonight, here.
I'll call and let you know.
What? You guys are roommates?
Peter Rabbit asked.
Partners in crime.
Judith Pratt snorted.
Lucky room, is all I can say.
Let's just have a universal dropping dead, except for Lenore.
Said Candy. She walked off across the marble lobby floor into the moving blackness.
She's got another job.
Peter Rabbit asked. Yes, the console beeped. Frequent and vigorous.
Where at?
Lenore held up a finger for him to wait while she dealt with somebody wanting to prize a set of radials. I've read a light sausage casings in East Corinth, she said when she released.
What an early place to work. What does she do?
The console began to beep. Product testing. Tasting department.
What a disgusting job.
Somebody has to do it.
Glad it's not me, boy.
But I do assume you have some kind of job to do? Like fixing our lines?
I'm off. I'll be in touch, if possible.
Peter Rabbit laughed and left, jingling. He walked into a moving patch of light in the middle of the lobby and light disappeared, taking them with it. Frequent and vigorous. Frequent and vigorous.